I always thought the best part of camping was finding a perfect spot, one untouched by the chaos of the modern world. This time, it was just supposed to be a weekend getaway with my friends, Mark, Lisa, Jenny, and Alex. We were an adventurous bunch, always seeking the thrill of the unknown. Little did we know, our latest adventure would plunge us into a nightmare we could never escape. We stumbled upon the clearing by sheer luck, or what we thought was luck. It was a wide, open space surrounded by towering pines, with a crystal clear stream running through it. The grass was lush and green, inviting us to set up camp. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the trees, we couldn't believe our good fortune. It was perfect. We set up our tents, lit a fire, and enjoyed the evening under the stars. The first signs of trouble came subtly. It started with the temperature dropping drastically. One moment, it was a mild summer evening. The next, a biting cold that made our breath visible in the moonlight. Jenny shivered and moved closer to the fire. "Did anyone else feel that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's probably just the forest," Mark replied, trying to sound confident. "These places can have weird microclimates." We laughed it off, but the unease lingered. As the night deepened, we heard faint whispers, so soft they could have been the wind. But there was something unsettling about them, a distant, echoing quality that made our skin crawl. Lisa was the first to notice something. She had gone to fetch more firewood from the edge of the clearing when she froze, staring into the dark forest. Her scream pierced the quiet night, sending chills down our spines. We rushed to her side, finding her pale and shaking, pointing into the woods. I saw someone," she stammered. "A girl, standing right there. She was just watching me." We looked, but saw nothing but shadows and trees swaying gently in the breeze. "You're just tired," Alex said, trying to calm her. "It's been a long day. Let's just get some rest." Reluctantly, we agreed, but the air was thick with tension. We retreated to our tents, each of us on edge, trying to sleep. But sleep did not come easily. I lay awake, listening to the forest, every rustle and creak amplified in the darkness. Around midnight, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. I could make out words, desperate and pleading. And then, a figure appeared at the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the moonlight. It was a young woman, her clothes tattered and dirty, her eyes wide with fear. She raised a hand as if to wave us away, her mouth moving soundlessly. I stumbled out of my tent, my heart pounding in my chest. "Guys, wake up. There's someone out there." The others emerged, groggy and annoyed, until they saw her too. The woman stepped closer, and suddenly, her face contorted in agony. She opened her mouth, and though no sound came out, we could feel her scream, a silent wail of terror that seemed to vibrate through the air. We watched in horror as she dissolved into a mist, leaving us standing in stunned silence. Then, we heard the voice, clear and resonant, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once: "Leave this place, or you will meet the same fate." Mark grabbed my arm, his eyes wide with fear. "What the hell is going on?" Before we could react, the ground beneath us seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Our tents, our gear, even the fire, flickered and dimmed as if an unseen force was closing in. We tried to run, but our feet felt heavy, as if the earth itself was holding us back. Panic set in. We were trapped. And the whispers returned, louder and more insistent, carrying tales of those who came before us, campers who never left. The apparitions of the dead surrounded us, their ghostly faces twisted in torment, warning us, pleading with us to leave. But how could we? The forest had us now, and it wasn't going to let go. As the night wore on, the temperature dropped further, our breaths now visible in the dim light of the dying fire. The apparitions grew more frequent, each one more terrifying than the last. We huddled together, trying to make sense of what was happening, but the truth was clear: we had stumbled upon something ancient and evil, a force beyond our comprehension. And it wanted us to stay. Morning came, but it did little to dispel the oppressive gloom that had settled over the clearing. The once inviting space now seemed sinister, with the trees casting long, foreboding shadows that seemed to stretch toward us like dark, skeletal fingers. We huddled around the remnants of our campfire, the night's terror still fresh in our minds. "I think we should leave," Jenny said, her voice trembling. "We need to get out of here, now." "But where do we go?" Mark countered. "We couldn't even move last night. It's like something's keeping us here." Alex, always the practical one, tried to think logically. "Maybe if we stick together and head back the way we came, we can find a way out. We just need to stay calm and focused." We agreed, though the fear was palpable in the air. We packed our things quickly, glancing nervously at the surrounding forest. The shadows seemed to move and shift, as if they were alive, watching our every move. With heavy hearts and wary eyes, we set off in the direction we believed we had come from. The forest felt different in the daylight, yet no less menacing. The trees seemed to close in around us, their branches creaking like the whispering voices from the night before. We walked for hours, but no matter how far we went, the scenery remained eerily unchanged. It was as if we were walking in circles, trapped in a never-ending loop. As the sun climbed higher, we stumbled upon something that stopped us in our tracks, another clearing, identical to the one we had just left. Our hearts sank as we realized we were back where we started, despite having walked for hours. "This is impossible," Lisa whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "We should have reached the road by now." Mark kicked a rock in frustration. "We're lost. Completely lost." Desperation was setting in. We argued about what to do next, but before we could reach a decision, the temperature began to drop again. The chilling cold from the previous night returned, enveloping us in an icy grip. The whispers started anew, this time louder and more insistent. "We need to keep moving," I said, my voice shaking. "Standing here won't help us." We pressed on, but with every step, the forest seemed to grow darker. The daylight faded unnaturally quickly, and soon, we found ourselves plunged into an early twilight. The whispers grew louder, their disembodied voices echoing all around us, filling us with a sense of impending doom. And then we saw them again, the apparitions. They materialized out of the shadows, pale and ghostly, their faces twisted in expressions of pain and terror. They moved silently, drifting toward us with outstretched hands. We backed away, but there was nowhere to go. We were surrounded. One of the apparitions, a young man with hollow eyes and tattered clothes, stepped forward. His voice was a haunting echo, barely more than a whisper. "You cannot leave. The forest won't let you. It keeps us here, bound to this place." "Why?" Alex demanded. "Why is this happening?" The young man's eyes filled with sorrow. "We were like you, once. We came here seeking adventure, but we found something else. Something dark and ancient. It needs us, feeds on our fear and despair. And now, it has you." A sense of hopelessness washed over us. We were trapped in a nightmare with no escape. The apparitions closed in, their ghostly forms flickering like dying flames. We were paralyzed by fear, unable to move or speak. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the forest. We turned to see one of the trees splitting open, its bark peeling away to reveal a dark, gaping hole. From within, a cold wind blew, carrying with it the scent of decay and death. "Go," the young man urged. "It's your only chance." We hesitated, unsure of whether to trust him, but the apparitions began to wail, their cries a cacophony of pain and suffering. It was enough to spur us into action. We ran toward the hole in the tree, the cold wind biting at our faces. As we approached, the ground beneath us trembled, and the whispers reached a fever pitch. It felt as though the very forest was trying to pull us back, to keep us from escaping. But we pressed on, driven by sheer terror and the desperate hope of finding a way out. One by one, we plunged into the darkness of the tree, the cold wind engulfing us. It was like falling into an abyss, an endless void where time and space ceased to exist. The last thing I heard before the darkness claimed me was the echoing whisper of the young man, "Remember, it needs you." And then, everything went black. When I awoke, I was lying on the forest floor, my friends scattered around me. The clearing was gone, replaced by a dense, impenetrable forest. We were alone, and the whispers had stopped. But the sense of dread remained, a heavy weight pressing down on us. "We need to keep moving," Mark said, his voice shaky. "We can't stay here." We got to our feet, exhausted but determined. We had escaped the clearing, but we knew the forest still held us in its grip. And somewhere, in the darkness, the ancient force that needed us was still waiting. We trudged through the dense forest, our steps heavy with exhaustion and fear. The sunlight barely penetrated the thick canopy above, casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. Every rustle, every whisper of wind sent shivers down our spines. We had escaped the clearing, but the sense of being watched, of being hunted, remained. We moved in silence, each of us lost in our thoughts, trying to make sense of what had happened. The apparitions, the whispers, the ghostly figures, they were all part of the forest's malevolent design. Hours passed, and the forest seemed to stretch on endlessly. There was no sign of civilization, no path to follow, just an unending sea of trees. Our supplies were dwindling, and the weight of despair was growing heavier with each step. As the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows through the forest, we stumbled upon a dilapidated cabin. It was half hidden by overgrown foliage, its wooden walls weathered and covered in moss. The windows were broken, and the door hung loosely on its hinges. "Do you think it's safe?" Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We don't have much choice," Alex replied. "We need to rest, and it's better than being out in the open." We approached cautiously, the sense of dread deepening with every step. The cabin looked like it hadn't been inhabited for years, but there was something about it that made our skin crawl. The air around it felt heavy, almost oppressive. Mark pushed the door open with a creak, and we stepped inside. The interior was dark and musty, with broken furniture strewn about. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. It was clear no one had been here for a long time. "We'll stay here for the night," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Let's set up a fire and try to get some rest." We gathered what little dry wood we could find and managed to start a small fire in the fireplace. The flickering flames cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, adding to the eerie atmosphere. We huddled around the fire, the warmth a small comfort against the growing cold. As night fell, the whispers returned, faint at first, then growing louder. They seemed to come from the very walls of the cabin, filling the room with their haunting echoes. We tried to ignore them, to block them out, but it was impossible. The whispers spoke of pain, of suffering, of endless torment. Then came the first jump scare. A loud, resounding thud echoed through the cabin, making us all jump. We looked around, hearts pounding, but saw nothing. The thud came again, this time louder, and we realized it was coming from beneath the floorboards. "What the hell is that?" Jenny whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know," Mark replied, his voice shaky. "But we need to find out." We hesitated, but the noise was growing louder, more insistent. We lifted the loose floorboards, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down into the earth. The cold air that wafted up from below sent chills down our spines. "We have to go down there," Alex said, his face pale. "Whatever is making that noise, we need to find it and stop it." Reluctantly, we descended the stairs, the air growing colder with each step. The whispers grew louder, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of terror. At the bottom, we found ourselves in a small, dark cellar. The walls were lined with shelves holding old, dusty jars and bottles. In the center of the cellar was a large, wooden chest. It was covered in strange symbols, carved deep into the wood, and emanated a malevolent energy. The thudding was coming from inside the chest, the lid rattling with each impact. "We need to open it," I said, my voice barely audible over the whispers. With trembling hands, we approached the chest. The air was thick with tension, the whispers now a deafening roar. Mark reached out and slowly lifted the lid. As it creaked open, the thudding stopped, replaced by a chilling silence. Inside the chest was a single, withered hand, severed at the wrist. It looked ancient, the skin shriveled and gray. But as we stared, the fingers began to move, twitching and curling as if trying to grasp something. We stumbled back in horror, the whispers reaching a fever pitch. The hand rose slowly, defying gravity, and floated in the air before us. Its movements were deliberate, almost purposeful, as it pointed towards the far wall of the cellar. A section of the wall began to shimmer, revealing a hidden doorway. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if urging us to go through. We had no choice. Driven by a mix of terror and curiosity, we stepped through the doorway and into a dark tunnel. The air was colder here, the darkness absolute. We moved forward cautiously, the whispers now a constant presence. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, each step taking us deeper into the unknown. Then, without warning, the tunnel opened up into a vast underground chamber. The walls were covered in more of the strange symbols, glowing faintly in the darkness. In the center of the chamber stood an ancient stone altar, stained with dark, dry blood. And there, standing behind the altar, was the figure of a man. His eyes glowed with a sinister light, and his face was twisted into a malevolent grin. He raised his hand, and the whispers fell silent. "Welcome," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "I've been waiting for you." Our blood ran cold as we realized we were no longer just lost in the forest. We were in the heart of something ancient and evil, and it had been waiting for us all along. The figure stepped forward, his grin widening, and we knew that our nightmare was far from over. The figure stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. We stood frozen in place, the weight of our fear pressing down on us like a suffocating blanket. The chamber seemed to close in around us, the symbols on the walls pulsating with a sinister energy. "Who are you?" Mark demanded, trying to sound brave but failing to hide the tremor in his voice. The man's grin widened. "I am the keeper of this place," he said, his voice smooth and cold. "And you, my dear visitors, have ventured into my domain. What do you want from us?" Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's eyes flickered with amusement. "Want? Oh, it's not about what I want. It's about what the forest wants. And right now, it wants you." We exchanged terrified glances, our minds racing for a way out. The man's presence was overpowering, his very being exuding an aura of malevolence. He seemed to sense our desperation, and his grin turned into a cruel smile. "There's no escape," he said, as if reading our thoughts. "The forest has claimed you. And once it has you, it never lets go." "Why us?" Alex asked, his voice breaking. "What did we do?" The man tilted his head, as if considering the question. "You were chosen," he said finally. "The forest needs new souls to sustain its power. And you, my friends, are the perfect candidates." The realization hit us like a punch to the gut. We had been lured here, trapped by an ancient force that fed on our fear and despair. The apparitions, the whispers, the ghostly figures, they were all part of the forest's malevolent design. Desperation gave way to determination. We couldn't just give up, not without a fight. I glanced around the chamber, searching for anything that might help us. My eyes fell on the symbols etched into the walls, and an idea began to form. What if we destroy these symbols? I whispered to the others. Maybe it will weaken the forest's hold on us. Mark nodded, his face set with grim resolve. "It's worth a try. We have to do something." We moved quickly, scraping and clawing at the glowing symbols. The man watched us with a bemused expression, but as we continued our efforts, his smile began to falter. The symbols started to flicker, their light dimming. "Stop," he commanded, his voice now tinged with anger. "You don't know what you're doing." But we ignored him, driven by the hope that we might find a way out. As we worked, the chamber began to tremble, the walls shaking as if the very ground was rebelling against us. The symbols flickered faster, their light growing erratic. And then, with a blinding flash, they went dark. The man let out a furious roar, his form flickering like a dying flame. "You will pay for this," he screamed, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You will all pay." The ground beneath us cracked open, and a thick, black smoke began to pour from the fissures. The air grew heavy with the stench of decay, and the whispers returned, louder and more frenzied than ever. The man lunged at us, his form now a shadowy wraith, but we were already moving. We ran back through the tunnel, the walls closing in around us. The ground shook violently, threatening to swallow us whole. We reached the cellar and scrambled up the stairs, the man's enraged cries echoing behind us. As we burst into the cabin, we found it had transformed. The walls were now covered in dark, pulsating veins, and the air was thick with an oppressive, malevolent presence. We didn't stop. We ran out of the cabin and into the forest, the ground shaking beneath our feet. The trees seemed to reach out for us, their branches twisting and curling like gnarled fingers. The whispers were deafening, a cacophony of voices urging us to give up, to surrender to the forest's will. But we pressed on, driven by sheer terror and the desperate hope that we might find a way out. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, an endless maze of trees and shadows. Just when we thought we couldn't run any further, we saw it, a faint glimmer of light through the trees. With renewed hope, we pushed forward, the light growing brighter with each step. The ground beneath us grew more stable, the whispers fading into the background. And then, with one final burst of effort, we broke through the tree line and stumbled into the open air. We collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. The forest lay behind us, a dark, impenetrable wall of trees. But we were out. We were free. Or so we thought. As we caught our breath, a chilling realization washed over us. The light we had seen was not the morning sun, but the flickering glow of our campfire. We were back in the clearing, right where we had started. The forest had let us go, but it had brought us back to the one place we couldn't escape. The air grew cold once more, and the whispers returned, more insistent than ever. The apparitions began to appear, their ghostly forms flickering in the firelight. We were trapped, caught in an endless loop of terror and despair. And somewhere, in the darkness, the keeper of the forest was watching, his malevolent grin returning. He had us exactly where he wanted us, and there was no way out. The night was far from over, and the true horror had only just begun. Months passed, but the memory of that night in the haunted clearing never faded. The four of us tried to move on, returning to our lives and pretending that the events in the forest were just a bad dream. But the weight of Alex's sacrifice lingered, an unspoken burden we all carried. One evening, we gathered at Mark's apartment for a quiet dinner, hoping to find some solace in each other's company. The conversation was light, but there was an underlying tension we couldn't shake. Every now and then, one of us would fall silent, lost in the haunting memories. As the night wore on, we decided to toast to Alex, our friend and hero. We raised our glasses, our eyes glistening with unshed tears. To Alex, Mark said softly, "May he rest in peace." The moment was somber, but it felt like a step toward healing. We were starting to accept what had happened, trying to find some semblance of closure. But as the clock struck midnight, the atmosphere in the room changed. A cold draft swept through the apartment, extinguishing the candles on the table. We looked around, startled. The temperature plummeted, our breaths visible in the sudden chill. The whispers began again, faint but unmistakable. "No," Jenny whispered, her voice trembling. "This can't be happening." Before we could react, a shadowy figure appeared in the corner of the room. It was Alex, but not the Alex we remembered. His form was ghostly, his eyes hollow and filled with a sorrowful light. He looked at us, his expression one of deep sadness. "Alex?" Lisa gasped, her voice barely a whisper. He nodded slowly. "It's me." We were frozen, unable to believe our eyes. "How is this possible?" Mark asked, his voice shaking. "We saw you. You were gone." Alex's ghostly form wavered, as if struggling to maintain its presence. "The forest lied," he said, his voice a haunting echo. "It didn't let me go. It trapped me, just like it trapped the others." The realization hit us like a punch to the gut. Alex's sacrifice had been in vain. The forest's malevolent power was far greater than we had understood. It had deceived us, allowing us to believe we were free while keeping Alex bound to its dark will. "Is there any way to save you?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. Alex shook his head slowly. "No. My fate is sealed. But there's something you need to know." We leaned in, our hearts pounding. Alex's eyes flickered with a mix of fear and urgency. "The forest is expanding," he said. "It's growing stronger, feeding on the fear and despair of those it traps. It's reaching out, trying to claim more souls. How do we stop it?" Mark asked, his voice filled with determination. "You can't stop it," Alex replied, his voice heavy with resignation. "But you can warn others. You can keep people away, prevent them from falling into its trap." We nodded, our resolve hardening. We had escaped the forest's clutches, but we couldn't let others suffer the same fate. We had to spread the word, warn anyone who would listen about the dangers lurking in the woods. As Alex's form began to fade, he looked at us one last time. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I wish I could have done more." "Alex, you did more than enough," Lisa said, tears streaming down her face. "We won't forget you. We'll make sure your sacrifice wasn't in vain." With a final, sorrowful nod, Alex's spirit dissolved into the air, leaving us standing in stunned silence. The whispers faded, and the temperature returned to normal. The room was quiet once more, but the weight of our mission pressed heavily on our shoulders. We knew what we had to do. The forest's dark secret could not remain hidden. We had to tell our story, share the truth with the world. It was the only way to honor Alex's memory and protect others from the malevolent force that had claimed him. In the days that followed, we started spreading the word. We shared our story online, gave interviews, and warned anyone who would listen. The haunted clearing became a cautionary tale, a dark legend that spread far and wide. And though we could never truly escape the memory of that night, we found some measure of peace in knowing we were doing everything we could to prevent others from falling into the same trap. The forest's power was great, but so was our determination. The whispers in the night no longer held us captive. We had found our purpose, our way to fight back. And in doing so, we kept Alex's spirit alive, a beacon of hope in the face of the darkness. But deep in the forest, the ancient force still lurked, waiting for its next victims, its whispers a constant reminder of the evil that could never be fully vanquished. And we knew, as long as the forest existed, the battle would never truly be over.